Whenever a new Pokemon game drops, I feel like everyone fixates on the graphics or the fastest way to extinct the entire shiny population. Meanwhile, I'm having most of my fun just looking at things like, hey, Surf seems to get a lot bigger when it's used as a plus move. Is anyone else noticing this? How many other moves are like this? And what happens if it's like a status effect move? Does paralysis get stronger? Surely someone is going through all 250-ish moves in this game, noting all the major differences between their normal and plus versions, because I can't be the only one noticing that some of these moves get completely transformed from their original versions, while others just have no visual differences at all. I'm seeing cast times get shorter, effective range getting longer, some projectiles move faster, or maybe they're just bigger. And it's not just the damage that's increasing in power. If you listen real closely, the sound's getting louder. You'll never guess how much longer certain buffs last, and is that an extra rock in Rock Blast? And what about Splash, a move that does absolutely nothing, no damage? There's no way that plussing a move like this can give you even a single advantage. I needed to know, and I didn't see anyone else putting the work in to figure all this stuff out, so I decided to make this video myself. And what I discovered in the process of recording all this footage and crawling through spreadsheets not only surprised me, but also gave me a fresh appreciation for a game that on my first playthrough I had mixed feelings about, to say the least. Now, this is where I say that this video will not contain any story or environmental spoilers, and I'll spare my thoughts and opinions on the full game until the end of the video, but for now I'll just say, as an animation nerd and someone who likes to dig into game systems to understand how they work, the new action battle system is by far the most fun and interesting part about Legends EA. And maybe it's just me, but I find it particularly fascinating to see how a company is going to take one of the most iconic turn-based battle systems of all time, which in its current state supports over 1,000 Pokemon, 934 moves, 310 abilities, and hundreds of held items, just to throw all that out and rebuild it from scratch as an action battle system without turns. And of course, they're making it slightly easier for themselves by ignoring abilities this time around and limiting the amount of moves and Pokemon that appear in the game. But so far, I would say that the results have been both interesting and sometimes baffling. You might recognize a move like Solar Beam, but this is not the Solar Beam that you know. You might expect the move Hypnosis to put a Pokemon to sleep, but there is no sleep for Pokemon in Legends EA. In fact, the more prior knowledge you try to bring in from the previous games, the more confused you'll be, but don't beat yourself up too much over it, because that's not what Confusion does anymore. In fact, Confusion might now be the most useless status effect of them all. And no, using the plus version does not make it any better. But there are plus versions of moves that do produce some interesting or unexpected results. Things I'm sure that most people missed, and things that even I'm still trying to figure out. And I hope by recording and organizing it all here as a resource for everyone at a smooth 60 frames per second with each move synced up to the exact start frame of its cast animation, that maybe some people will find it useful or help me fill in the knowledge gaps. If you just want to see a specific move comparison, I'm going to include a full alphabetized compilation at the end of this video, so feel free to scrub through that at any time. But I guarantee you there are details about these moves and this battle system that you have never seen or heard before, so I highly recommend sticking around for the guided tour. The only thing not in this video, but it might be in a future one, is the moves from the Mega Dimension DLC. I'll be honest, I assumed that DLC was going to be a lot smaller than it was. My original plan was to finish most of this video before the DLC came out and then just kind of tack on the new moves at the end, but it turns out they added almost another 100 moves, so yeah, that's just gonna have to be its own video. And while I'm no PvP expert, I do have some thoughts and ideas that I'll share at the end of this video. I've hit max rank multiple seasons, but trust me, that is not as hard as it sounds, and I'm sure that there are people smarter than me if you want to hear up-to-date strategies on the meta and which moves are competitively viable. In the meantime, consider this video just a raw data resource, and I'll link the spreadsheets that have the more detailed move data in the description. Now, before we get into the meat of things, I have a confession to make. For my entire first playthrough of this game, I completely missed something very obvious, and I'm only mentioning this because I know there might be others that are also afraid of being embarrassed or looking stupid, and I just want them to know they are not alone and it's not their fault. I too did not know that pressing the plus button was how you toggled on plus moves. And that might sound crazy to some of you that I don't know are blessed with the power of reading comprehension, but I promise you there are people watching this right now that also didn't figure this out until way later in their playthrough. Or they might even be learning this information for the first time, because quite frankly, they never needed to use plus moves in the first place. Spending a chunk of that meter just to activate a single plus move on a non-mega evolved, non-stat boosted Pokemon makes no sense, especially if you're running a full team of Pokemon holding Mega Stones. It's far more efficient to just Mega Evolve when the bar fills up, which activates the plus moves automatically, and then you just spam them for free, essentially. There are some good reasons why you might want to plus a single move, but we'll get to that later. Let's get to the first and simplest difference between normal and plus moves, the damage. Plus moves do 20% more damage than their regular versions, or 30% more if the move deals super effective damage. You might have noticed this difference as you played, especially during rogue mega battles, but what you might not have noticed until seeing all these side-by-sides is that the size of the visual effects on some of these moves are getting boosted as well. The fangs in Fire Fang get bigger, the smoke in Smokescreen spreads farther, the beams in Hyper Beam or Hydro Pump get girthier, but sometimes the difference is not as noticeable, or there is no difference. The increases aren't consistent either. I checked a handful of moves by just overlaying stills in Photoshop and found some plus moves like Bulldoze only get a 20% size boost, while the plus version of Dark Pulse gets 70% bigger. This not only makes the moves look more powerful, but it also increases the range and hitbox. You don't have to be as close to a Pokemon to score a hit, and while a projectile might move at roughly the same relative speed as its non-plussed version, even though I swear some of these plus moves are moving faster, the larger hitbox means it will arrive a few frames sooner than the non-plus version, even if you fired it from the same starting position. And I don't think I even need to point out why having a bigger radius to Earthquake or Hurricane is insanely good in this game's horrendously imbalanced free-for-all PvP mode. And while it's outside the scope of this video to go in depth, the size of the Pokemon also plays a part. The bigger the Pokemon, the bigger the size of its attacks. This is very obvious between different species, but it's also true when comparing normal-sized Pokemon to their alpha versions. For instance, this normal-sized Larvitar has a much smaller Earthquake when compared to a Tyranitar's, but look how much bigger an alpha Larvitar's Earthquake ends up being. Just keep in mind that bigger Pokemon means a bigger hitbox, so this might not always be the best choice in all scenarios, but we'll talk more about PvP later in the video. The next biggest visual difference with plus moves that you may have noticed is this burst of pink particles. Sometimes it happens on impact, sometimes it just emits from the Pokemon, and you would think this would be consistent across all plus moves, as it's sort of a nice indicator that you're spending mega energy to cast them. But in my recording, I think only about half of the moves spit out these particles, and this could be because I recorded a lot of these moves hitting non-living targets like substitute dolls or obstacles. As you can see, Ice Punch doesn't produce particles when hitting a totem, but it does when I hit an actual Pokemon, which is weird because a lot of the moves do produce pink particles when hitting a lifeless object, so I'm not sure what the governing logic is here, or if this is just like a bug. Most self-buffing moves do pop them, but some like Protect or Light Screen, for whatever reason, do not. And then there's the audio differences. There's nothing too fancy here, but it seems that plus moves play the same sound effect as normal moves, just with boosted volume and some sort of added chorus effect. That's a filter that basically widens the waveform by layering multiple copies of itself with slight adjustments to its pitch and timing. And this is most obvious in Perish Song, where you can hear the clear single string sample in the normal version of the move. And then you compare that to the sound of the layered strings that you hear in the plus version. I was personally hoping that with a move like Growl, which does use the Pokemon's cry as part of the audio mix, and maybe that cry would also get a volume or chorus boost, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to happen. But here's an example of what that would have sounded like. So what if you see a move that seems to have no visual or aesthetic change? Chances are this means that the bonus effect is being applied to either the cooldown, cast times, the durations of buffs or debuffs, and in some cases increasing the power of pushback. Sometimes these changes are so small I'd argue it's an objective waste of mega energy. Like with the move Screech, the plus version is only adding 3 seconds to a 30-second defense reduction timer, which is a 10% bonus, whereas a plus version of Protect, which normally has a cooldown of 15 seconds, that gets reduced down to 12 seconds, which is a 20% bonus. The move Detect works the same exact way, except that it requires a little bit more skill. That window of protection is shorter, but it also gets a shorter cooldown that when plus goes from 13 seconds down to 10. And while more rare, the moves that have cast time reduction are extremely useful in PvP matches where most of your deaths are happening while you're waiting for a move to go off. The spreadsheet refers to these as charge frames, and the most drastic example being Solar Beam's 70 frames of charge time getting cut down to just 15 frames. That's an 80% reduction. And then you have Focus Energy's 30 frames of charge getting reduced to just a single frame, or a 97% reduction. What I found strange is that Solar Beam is the only damage dealing move in the game that receives any cast time reduction at all. Every other move with reduced cast frames are either self buffs, heals, or useless moves like Splash. And actually, let's take a closer look at Splash and see if it really is just a joke move like everyone assumes. The spreadsheet doesn't show any difference except for a faster cast time, and sadly, the animation and jump height of Splash remains the same. But let's not forget that we are in an action battle system now, and every move used, even if it misses or does nothing, still does technically give you a little bit of mega energy back, which means that this might be the first time ever that using Splash actually results in some kind of tangible benefit to the player. Although I guess there was one time in Gen 7 where Splash could be like a Z move that increased attack power, but let's ignore that because the irony is that this benefit goes away if you use the plus version of Splash, which then actively eats into the mega energy that you just earned. And now the move isn't fun and cute anymore. It's just actively hurting you. Another category that got drastic overhauls in this new system were any moves with status effects. Hypnosis no longer puts Pokemon fully to sleep. It just makes them drowsy and increases their cooldowns. Paralysis no longer has a small chance of blocking a Pokemon's turn. It just reduces their movement speed. Confusion no longer causes a Pokemon to sometimes waste a move by hitting itself. It just makes them guaranteed to fail a sobriety test. Nerfing movement speed or messing with Pokemon pathing just simply is not that big of a punishment with how most of the moves work in this game and how small the spaces are that you're fighting in. Overall, I think these were the moves that suffered the most in the translation to an action battle format, and while I can understand why they wanted to avoid making these too powerful, I do think they played it too safe and made the status effects in this game functionally useless. In most cases, all you're getting with a plus Hypnosis or Poison Powder is just more range. This is especially true with Toxic, which already had a much better range than Poison Powder by default, and that range gets even bigger in its plus state. Poison Powder is not only weaker, dealing less damage at a fixed rate, but it actually takes slightly longer to cast when plussed. It's only 10 extra frames and you do get a little bit more range, but you have to ask yourself, in a game where standing still is basically a death sentence, is this slight boost to range actually worth it? Stun Spore and Sleep Powder have the same issue. You're spending extra time and mega energy just for a little bit more range, and the status effect doesn't even get any better. Toxic, on the other hand, can be decent in a 1v1 setting. It still has its classic scaling tick damage, and the extra range from being plussed is perfect if you're trying to keep your distance for some obnoxious stall strats. For online PvP though, in a match with 4 people, good luck. Most of those fights won't last long enough for Toxic to really kick in anyway. There are some damage moves that also have longer attack animations in their plussed state, like Brave Bird or Surf, which travel just a bit further when plussed, but the difference here is that at least you're dealing damage while moving, so you're not just a sitting duck. Because you should keep in mind that you can still get hit during these animations, but I think both the increased range and, especially in Surf's case, the increased size of the attack is worth the extra risk. With status effects that do expire on a timer, usually you are increasing that timer by a few seconds, which I'd also say is of questionable value. And then lastly, you have moves like Roar or Whirlwind with the unique ability to shove enemies back without doing damage. The plus version of these moves basically just have more range and pushing power, but there are some damage moves that shove Pokemon as well, like Outrage. But because I recorded most of these moves using substitute dolls, which can't be moved, I'm not totally sure which moves do or don't have pushback, but it's just something to keep in mind that might also be getting boosted by a move's plus state. Speaking of substitute dolls, let's look at some of the more unique plus move differences that don't fit neatly into any categories. Normally when you spam substitute, it will replace the current doll in the field with a new one, a process I got very, very familiar with as I set up shots for this video. But if you use the plus version of substitute, not only does it produce a bigger doll, it also doesn't replace an existing normal sized one, letting you have 2 dolls out at once. I don't know if this is actually useful in battles in any way, but there you go. The same concept applies to Rock Tomb, allowing you to have 2 instances of the move out at the same time. And I'm sure all the Greninja fans are already aware that the plus version of Water Shuriken converts the 5 Shuriken projectiles into 1 big one, but there are a few other projectile attacks that get modified as well. Water Pulse goes from 3 pulses to just 2, while the opposite happens with Bullet Seed, Pin Missile, and Rock Blast. Did you catch it? No transforming particles here, they just add an extra one at the end. So 6 bullets now instead of 5. Smokescreen is one of the few moves that can be used outside of battle to help you do things like sneak up on NPCs. The only problem is, and this is one of my biggest gripes about this entire battle system, is that you can't use a move unless you are targeting something, even if it's just a self-cast move like this one. So yeah, Smokescreen would be great for farming points in a ZA Royale, but unless you have lots of obstacles around you to target, if you're already close enough to the enemy to target them, why bother using a smokescreen at that point? Just attack them. And you might expect a move like Mist to have the same effect as Smokescreen, making its area of effect bigger, but instead the size is the same and it just remains on the field for an extra 10 seconds. And maybe you're familiar with a special interaction between the moves Dig and Earthquake from the main series, where on the first turn of Dig, while a Pokemon is underground, it can still take damage from a Pokemon using Earthquake, but that special move interaction does not exist in Legends ZA. Super Fang also no longer does 50% of a Pokemon's remaining HP. It seems to be closer to 25-30%, and a plus Super Fang doesn't modify this percentage, it just gives you a bit of extra range. Toxic Spikes is another move from the main series that has a special interaction with itself, where if you layer 2 turns of spikes, the Pokemon switching in will be hit with Toxic instead of the normal poison status effect. This does not seem to happen in ZA. If you plus Toxic Spikes, they just get slightly bigger, and if you layer 2 on the same Pokemon, they just retain the same normal poison damage. And then there's Fly, a move that I was excited to see the plus version of because there seemed to be so many ways you could boost it. The range, the charge frames, the time in the air, the size of the landing impact, or even just some fancier impact visuals, but I'm sure you've noticed by now that yeah, there's not a single difference. I checked every visual angle, every numerical value on the spreadsheet. All it gets is the same 20% damage boost as the other plus moves. But then I noticed the same was true for other similar moves like Flying Press, Bounce, and even Heat Crash. These are all moves that have you fly up and off screen before making impact. And my guess is that these moves were already so strong because you become untargetable and you go off screen for a moment, so adding any other buff to this would probably have been overkill. I still feel like I could be missing something though. I even went back again to see if Fly might cause pushback on impact, and maybe that's what gets boosted when plussed, but nope. And this is also where I should mention that I have a Patreon. If you want to support high effort, obsessively analytical content like this in the future, any support over there means the world. I cannot even begin to describe how long this video took to put together. There's also some behind the scenes posts up there, some deleted sections from the video, previews of what I'm working on next, and a monthly vote where patrons can influence what games I check out on stream. I would love to be able to make videos like this more often and fight back against the ever-increasing wave of slop content out there, so if that sounds like a mission you'd like to support, you can find links to all my stuff below, and even if none of that's for you, I'm extremely grateful for everyone who just watches and interacts with my videos. I really couldn't do this without you guys. And that brings us to our final section, move categories. This doesn't have to do with plus moves necessarily, but I noticed there are a lot of moves in the game that reuse the same base assets, just tinted a different color or have a swapped out shader or different particles. The most obvious example is the move Bite, which uses this same teeth animation for Crunch, Fire Fang, Ice Fang, Thunder Fang, and Leech Life. Then there are energy ring style moves like Bug Buzz, Disarming Voice, Dragon Pulse, Hyper Voice, Leaf Storm, Thunder Wave, and Water Pulse. The wind asset in Blizzard, Gust, Heat Wave, Icy Wind, and Twister also share some elements, and the list goes on with similar looking beams, orbs, claws, fists, webs, vortexes, cones, mists, sprays, explosions, and even ground attacks. And before you say, oh, classic Game Freak cutting corners again, there are also a lot of moves that use fully unique assets and animations like Lick, Stone Edge, Spiky Shield, Trick or Treat, Wood Hammer, and of course, most of the mythical or legendary exclusive moves. I'm also going to include Hoopa's moves here, since the data for them and a few other downloadable legendaries were actually viewable in the base game's move list and in the game's data. So I guess consider this a teaser for part 2, featuring the rest of the DLC, drop a comment if that's something you would like to see. Now, I've saved the weirdest move for last, and this is a spoiler warning because there's no way to show this without spoiling one of the biggest mega evolutions that takes place as part of the main story. This is Nihil Light, and you'll notice there is no split screen for this move because this move cannot be used in a non-plus state. It is a move that's only available after you Mega Evolve Zygarde, and it replaces whatever slot you had Core Enforcer in. So I guess this should be a split screen between Core Enforcer and Nihil Light, except, surprise, Core Enforcer is also weird because it also changes depending on what form of Zygarde is casting it. And it was actually while recording this that I realized, wait, isn't there another story-based Mega that has a special move? Does that change when you Mega Evolve that Pokemon? And the answer is yes. Floette's Light of Ruin doesn't become a different move after Mega Evolving, but it sure looks bigger. But it could also be that Mega Floette is just a little bit bigger, which does increase the size of moves in general. This was not something I was checking for actively, but if you're aware of any move differences with Megas specifically, let me know. And overall, making this video has just given me a greater appreciation for the surprising amount of detail and layering in some of the more complex animations as I've watched them frame by frame hundreds of times now. Like, for example, Self-Destruct, which starts with this short iridescent aura that gets interrupted by a white hot flash that collapses into the actual explosion, which is made up of 4 separate layers: the fireball core, the flash of sparks, the rolling smoke, and even the distortion of the air as it gets pushed away. Visible not just in this ring of expanding dust, but also in the superheated air that distorts the space around the explosion as it travels in a bubble from the epicenter. This distortion is only visible for 6 frames. Actually, do you want to see how fast 6 frames is when played in real time? Don't blink. But the result of all these little details is a very satisfying and stylish explosion that really has no business looking this good, standing right next to other details in this game that feel very half-baked. And I think overall that's a pretty good picture of what Legends ZA is. These are some of the most polished visual effects and interesting mechanics we've ever gotten in a Pokemon game, but the overall scope and variety and depth just isn't there. The whole game feels like a vertical slice of a delicious cake that we might not ever get to see, much less eat. It is a boxed-in beta, just a piece of a bigger game that, if it existed, could be taking the series in a very new and exciting direction. But it's hard to be excited about it because people have been saying the same thing about every new Pokemon game for decades. Well, they had to build and test all these new mechanics. Well, they had to spend so much time going from 2D to 3D. Well, they had to prep for the transition for console graphics. Well, there's too many Pokemon, so they had to cut back on the Pokedex. But the next game, that's going to be the good one we've been waiting for. But even with all that said, I genuinely had a good time with ZA. I think this battle system is a radical enough improvement that it could genuinely lead to bigger and better Legends games, and maybe we'll even get abilities back. ZA does feel more finished than Arceus, visually and mechanically, but I do miss that painterly art style, the Pokedex tasks for each Pokemon, being able to ride through a variety of biomes outside. But ZA's characters, story, and writing were a huge step up for me, and while graphics have never been my primary concern with Pokemon games, I do think it's an extremely fair expectation to at least have voice acting at this point, or just any breath of sound coming out of these characters at all, even if you have to go like Banjo-Kazooie with it. The better these games start to look, the weirder it becomes that the sound just isn't there. And maybe this is a hot take, but I think we need to update the Pokemon cries too. I understand the Pokemon Company has sort of backed themselves into a localization hell corner by having Pokemon say their names in different languages, so I don't expect them to actually consider this, but if you've ever played Pokepark, you know how big of a difference it can make. I saw so many people say that the new battle system made them feel like they were finally playing a real Pokemon battle from the anime. Imagine the extra immersion if they sounded like the Pokemon from the anime too. Now, this marks the point in the video where I'm going to start playing the side-by-sides for every single move in the game in alphabetical order, so if you skip to this point in the video from the start, hi, hello again, enjoy scrubbing through the moves you're interested in. Just keep in mind not every move has visual differences, but I'm including them all anyway just for the sake of being thorough. That is every move in the base game, not counting the DLC, which added another 100 or so moves that I haven't had time to analyze yet. But I'd be happy to do it depending on how this video goes. I'm also going to use this time to talk a bit about PvP and other other thoughts I have on the game, including the reveal of the one thing that Game Freak left out of this game that I don't think I'll be able to forgive them for. But if you'd like to watch this entire move compilation without me talking over it and just enjoy the ambient audio of the game, that video already exists up on my Patreon, and I must say it makes for a quite relaxing watch. The ambient sound design in this game is maybe one of my favorite things about it, to the point that I actually went back and re-recorded some of the audio for these moves when I realized that I had left the music on for some of them. So yeah, pay attention towards the end if you can pick out the ones that were dubbed. And before we move on to PvP, just to note a couple things. I didn't notice until editing the video that they do have a visual for getting critical hits in the game. It appears as a green flash, so as you're watching through the compilation, keep an eye out for that. If you want a hint for which one of the moves does have it, because there's only a couple, one of them rhymes with flower up funch. And one of the reasons why this video actually took so long to make is because I really didn't want to record every single one of these moves in the dojo. First of all, it's not really possible because it's too small and some of the moves just clip into the building behind the totem. And secondly, I just found it kind of visually uninteresting. And I know that's how everyone feels about the entire city because we all got kind of sick of not being able to go anywhere else. But if you step back, I think there were some genuinely picturesque locations in Lumios. And I just felt better about making this video in different locations, different times of day, getting to see the moves in different light, seeing how some of the moves reflect off the environment, even though getting substitute dolls to each of these places and not having them die to the moves was a big ordeal. And sometimes it wouldn't work and I would have to go to PvP and recruit Bandy to play as my punching bag. So shout out to her for taking the time. She also provided some of the shinies for this video, as did some of the people from my Patreon. So thank you guys for that. Now, obviously there's a lot more to talk about with this game's battle system that didn't make sense to include in the main part of the video. We didn't even touch on the held item mechanic and how those have been translated over, which is kind of why I didn't want to talk about PvP too much because one, I just haven't put the hours in, and two, I'm not sure how serious Game Freak is about it either. Again, this entire game feels like it exists just to test this new battle system at this point. I think they know full well that their 4-player free-for-all game mode is not fair or balanced in a competitive sense, which is also why there's random power-ups dropping and no option for a 1v1 or team playlist. There are probably some very cheesy and broken team comps that they just did not want to have to account for, so chaos was chosen as the only safe path to fairness. And I actually think that that was the right move. This battle system is cool, but it's not matured yet, and I wouldn't be surprised if they made sweeping changes to it for the next Legends game. And I would even go as far as to say that the plus move system in general was balanced around the rogue mega bosses way more than it was for PvP. I think that's one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier that it's usually just more efficient to mega evolve. There really is no reason to use a singular plus move unless you're trying to play with Pokemon that just can't mega evolve, or if you don't want to commit to a mega evolution just to like boost a buff that you're putting down in PvP before you switch to another Pokemon. And I also kind of wish that hitting rank A was a little bit harder. I mean, they already robbed us of the satisfaction of grinding all the way from Z to A in the main story, so it would be nice if you could have that feeling of achievement from the multiplayer, but even off of just one good win, you can easily rank up 3 or 4 letters because of how the points work. They seem to be very concerned about scaring people away from the PvP too, that they even patched out the ability to lose points in ranked games at all. Something that wasn't that common anyway, because you could get in 4th place and still not lose points because of all the bonus points you get for random things like being the first one to attack or to mega evolve or the last one to attack. And wait, does that mean it's theoretically possible to reach rank A without attacking at all? And already I find myself wishing I could cut to other footage, but I need to stay strong and just let the moves play out. I've already spent way too long editing this video because I actually did have the thought of doing some kind of content around hitting rank A without dealing a single point of damage. A sort of pacifist run, you could say, using only neutral moves like Splash, Substitute, or defensive moves like Protect and Light Screen. Basically just trying to stay alive as long as possible and take advantage of the very small point bonuses that you get for passive actions like being the first to pick up a power-up or being the first to Mega Evolve. But I wasn't sure if that would make an interesting video or stream, so I decided to test it out and actually managed to get to rank T in just a couple hours. At first it wasn't that hard to stack a few bonuses and get like 30 or 40 points a match, but as the matches got harder, I would sometimes end up with matches where I got 0 points. So while it's definitely possible, I decided it would take way too long and I just have more fulfilling things I want to work on. So I abandoned that idea. The footage of getting up to rank T does exist though. If anyone's curious, let me know. Overall, I found myself pretty uninterested in learning the actual meta for PvP because while I was just messing around for fun, I was already getting fatigued seeing Xerneas and Garchomp in every single match, and I just didn't want to add to the noise. I actually had the most amount of fun in PvP when I imposed limits on myself. So forcing myself to only use my favorite type, which is bug type Pokemon, playing with a team of Scyther, Heracross, Scizor, sometimes Venipede. I say, pick the Pokemon you like. Yeah, you're not going to get as many kills, and you're probably very rarely going to ever get in first place, but you'll get enough points to make progress every match. With enough endurance, you really can just rank up with literally any team of Pokemon you want, especially because there's no more point penalties. In fact, I tried looking for a full list of the point bonuses in PvP, the things that, you know, you get rewarded for being the first hit or mega evolving a certain amount of times, but I couldn't find one online. So if you have access to that or you know where to find it, I'm curious to see them all and the conditions that trigger each one. So let me know. And before we move away from PvP, I just want to share like one final shower thought or conspiracy theory that I've been kind of chewing on, because I don't think it's a coincidence that most of the like trainer on trainer battles are referred to as royales in this game. Like, we've seen Nintendo and Game Freak pull up very late to certain trends, and I think they saw an opportunity with this Pokemon game that was going to take place in a big city and have some kind of multiplayer component. And they're like, hey, you know what? Kids love battle royales. What if we did a Pokemon battle royale large scale multiplayer thing? And I think there is some evidence to this. I don't know if you guys saw the video covering some of the beta builds of the game, if that's even still up. But in it, you can clearly tell they were testing like larger scale multiplayer modes that involved like up to 8 people. So I doubt they would have been able to pull off like giant 100 people lobbies or anything like that. But I think some kind of online PvP mode was going to be a much bigger thing. And it clearly just got cut down and cut down and cut down until we ended up with this singular free-for-all chaos mode, which probably was the best call. I don't think this battle system is polished enough, and I also don't think the Switch 1 would have been able to support big city-wide multiplayer matches, so it would have been cool to see. I would have liked to try something like that, but yeah, I don't think it would have gone very well. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about the budget of the game being ridiculously low, that despite them taking that extra year of dev time to polish everything, the game still looks and feels like a lazy cash grab. And on one hand, yeah, any product from a $100 billion franchise is going to exist to maximize profits. That shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and you should always vote with your wallet. But I do think this game exists as a direct response to the embarrassment that was the launch of Scarlet and Violet. They clearly put in the extra time to make sure that ZA, above all else, and at bare minimum, ran smoothly at launch. And it did. But the fact that they had to produce something that ran steady on the Switch 1 was a massive handicap to the project. I wouldn't be surprised if the reason we didn't even get mounts or rollerblades was because the max speed of the character sprint was already tuned to the absolute limit of what the Switch 1's render distance could handle. Or it could just be that letting us move faster would have made us realize how small the city actually was. Either way, I think it's unfair to say that the game is some massive step backwards for the series. There are some major upgrades and attention to detail worth appreciating, and I'm only just scratching the surface of it by looking at the battle system, but no matter how good the character models have gotten, or the storytelling is improved, or how lively the new Pokemon animations are, all of those things will be overshadowed for most people by the extremely limited scope and lack of environmental variety, and I think fairly so. But it's also crazy because the DLC had a chance to fix this, at least partially, by letting us jump into portals to other locations, and to an extent it does do that, but I'm speaking vaguely to avoid spoilers. But it doesn't do it to a degree that makes a meaningful difference, and definitely not to a degree that justifies spending an extra $30. The total cost of the DLC for Scarlet and Violet was $35, and that included 2 fully explorable maps and Pokedex expansions. Meanwhile, this DLC just kind of feels like they carved out the post game and sold it back to us. And if you think it's unfair to compare Legends games to the box Legendary main series games, I disagree. They are supposedly both classified as mainline, and I think comparing the relative value of how many dollars equals how much content is very reasonable. Also, it's kind of messed up we didn't get a single city-like activity or mini game. Like, there's no way these people just battle and drink coffee all day. Where's the movie theaters, arcades, clubs, sports complexes, anything? I'm not saying Pokemon needs to be more like Persona, but I'm just saying you're doing an RPG in a city. I think you could have done some fun stuff with social links, at least. And speaking of Persona, I actually love the music in this game. I think that was maybe one of the highlights. The only issue with it is there just isn't enough. The city music just kind of being 2 tracks, one for day, one for night, that got kind of repetitive and old pretty quickly. Like, I saw a lot of discussion about how the different districts of the city needed more like visual separation, and I totally agree. And music would have been a great way to do that too, just having different tracks or different styles of music playing in different parts of the city. That would have been cool. And then I just wanted to mention that the audio that I'm using in this compilation is favoring the plus move. So basically I'm just muting the audio of the non-plus move so that they don't stack and create like distortion. Again, most of this video is about comparing the visuals. Maybe I did miss some interesting comparisons between the normal audio and the plus audio. If you're aware of anything like that, let me know. But I think that's it. I think I've literally said everything I can possibly think of in this little mini informal review. Which brings us to the finale. What's the one thing that Game Freak left out of this game that I will never be able to forgive them for? You may know that I am a fan of bug-type Pokemon, and maybe you're wondering, what's my favorite bug-type Pokemon of all time? Caterpie. And Caterpie is not in this game. Why couldn't they just have put him in the game? He's so small, he would have fit anywhere. You're gonna let Weedle into the game before Caterpie? I know there's like Beedrill has a Mega and like that's why, but like Scatterbug's gonna get in there before Caterpie? Anyway, that's it. That's all my thoughts on the video. Enjoy the rest of the moves.